Hi, my name is Annie Grossman, and I'm a dog trainer. This podcast is brought to you by School for the Dogs, a Manhattan-based facility I own and operate along with some of the city's finest dog trainers. During this podcast, we'll be answering your questions, geeking out on animal behavior, discussing pet trends, and interviewing industry experts. Welcome to School for the Dogs podcast. So I am here with a woman who I have known for 3 years. I met her in July 2015. I could almost tell you the date. That's how important this day was to to me and to everyone at School for the Dogs. Her name is Anamarie Johnson. She is our general manager and has been training with us for almost 3 years, and is just the smiliest, sweetest person, and all the dogs love her. I think the people love her too.
I hope so.
But Anamarie, tell us a little bit about how you came to be the ray of sunshine you are at School for the Dogs.
Oh, I don't know how you became the ray of
sunshine. You were born in a
sunshine.
small town in California.
San Francisco. Not so much small.
I picture you raised in the woods by like fairies and bunnies.
No. I was raised in Daly City, but basically grew up in San Francisco, and there were no fairies and bunnies in my backyard. The fact that we got a squirrel that came to my house in like high school was like the biggest moment of my mom's life. It's a running joke actually that a friend was at my house and my mom just started screaming for everyone in the whole house to come look out the back window because the squirrel had arrived in the back. Yeah, I know.
The squirrel had arrived?
Well, we didn't get squirrels in Daly City.
What color squirrel was it? Do you remember?
Brown squirrel.
Brown?
It wasn't.
Have you seen black squirrels?
Yeah.
Is that like a New York thing, the black squirrel?
We didn't have black squirrels in California. It was just the brown, boring, whatever, gray squirrels. And then where I went to college at UC Davis, we're overrun with squirrels. That was actually a funny thing. Like one day on campus, all of a sudden, some of the squirrels were spray painted. And it was actually a big issue because Davis has like a really big animal department and everything like that. They had actually taken and they were spray painting squirrels because they were giving...
Who's they?
Like one of the departments, one of like the animal research departments, because they wanted to test a prophylactic on the squirrels. So they were giving some of the male squirrels drugs to make them not reproduce because the squirrel population was crazy. So they wanted to have like a non-invasive way.
So what color were they spray painting them?
They were like green and orange. So like and then there was all these poor undergrads on campus that were like sitting on the corners and they were like recording because they wanted to see preemptively if this like the whatever drug they were giving them was affecting their like natural behaviors, so to speak, rather than just reproductive behavior. So all these students were just sitting on these corners and they were like had their little notebooks recording animal behavior of the squirrels. I did not fix that.
I've had an idea that I've never done, but if somebody's listening to this and would like to do it, I get in touch because I think it would be an interesting experiment to spray paint rats in the subway.
For what purpose?
So you could train them to do stuff. Trick training for subway rats.
Oh, that's disgusting.
Is it? I don't know. There people all over the world are training rats. Most of them just are in cages. But why can't... the rats are already pretty well trained to find pizza.
You would have to determine that the rats were staying in the same subway line or same... I guess you would have... So
the first step would be spray painting one and then following it.
Yes. The first step would be spray painting one.
Or microchipping it.
Yeah, microchipping would be hard though because you would have to actively catch the squirrel and then
the rat.
Well, yeah, the rat, squirrel, the rat. You would have to actively grab the rat and then.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do any rat grabbing, but Ilana's coming to New York this summer.
There you go.
Our trainer Ilana has a Bobby bookshelf, an IKEA Bobby bookshelf that she's
she's divided into different floors. On each floor, there's a different mouse family that lives there. She has a mouse apartment building in her apartment.
Means monk. I love but you. Monkey talk means chimp. I love you too.
Grew up in San Francisco. Surprise. Did not actually have any dogs growing up.
Did you want dogs?
Yeah, I always wanted dogs. We got my first cat.
Why couldn't you have a dog, or didn't you?
It wasn't that we couldn't have a dog. It was that my mom didn't want a dog. There was a family, like, we always loved animals. So for a long time, the family joke was that we didn't have any pets, but we had the cute little fruit flies that came into our house. So my mom had a little jingle that was, some people have cats, some people have dogs, we have flies.
That was her jingle.
That was my mom's jingle.
Did she sing it?
Yeah.
I want to hear the song.
Well, like, it was just like, some people have cats, some people have dogs, we have flies. And that was it. And then she would, like, throw the little flies.
I think your mom should not pursue that jingle writing career.
It's not a good jingle. And she would put the flies out the window, or, like, say whatever. And we actually didn't get our first family pet until I was 7, and the only reason I remember, like, the exact time frame, because her name was Mississippi, and she was a little cat. She was actually a regular sized cat from San Francisco SPCA, and we had gone down because San Francisco SPCA every year they actually take over the windows of Macy's. Which I always thought would have been a really good idea at the Macy's here, but whatever. They take over the windows.
That is a good idea.
They take over the windows at Macy's. They've done it for years, and they actually have, like, volunteers down there. And so they put kittens, they put cats and like dogs in the windows for, like, adoptions. So we always used to go down there, and Kitty, inventive name, was not actually in the window, but she was, like, down the block because they had other animals for adoption. So we loaded her up in her little box in the middle of downtown San Francisco Union Square, and we brought her home, and she was excellent.
And Kitty was a cat.
Kitty was a cat.
Okay,
I know.
just checking.
Yeah, just
making sure.
Just to reiterate, Kitty was a cat, and
because in the world that would fall into the group of ironic dog names.
I know. No, it was not. We were non-inventive family. So we had Kitty till I was 11, and then she passed away, which was hard. And then we got 2 new cats from the San Francisco SPCA. But my mom was still insistent. She didn't want a dog. She could handle cats. Part of it also was she said it was too much of an emotional bond, which I feel like is a really illogical statement. But she felt bad. She felt like the cats didn't necessarily care when you left. The dogs really had a connection to you, and so that's why she didn't want to deal with them. Because she felt bad if we ever left.
Oh.
Which, I mean, I can see that. So, she
had cats because she didn't want a dog that would have to be alone.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And weren't you guys home a lot?
Yeah, but...
but you would go in and out?
Yeah.
Okay.
She just felt bad. So, we ended up... Donna and Pepper then became another inventive name, Poochie and Poochie Mama, because we discovered that they weren't sisters because Poochie, in her hiding space, we discovered a very odd noise one day, and Poochie, being the very special behaviorally cat that she was, continually for the rest of her days would nurse on her mother. Even though there clearly was not anything left, she would just nurse on the fur. So Poochie Mama had this gross yellow discolored fur.
Kind of like a Grey Garden situation.
Yeah, it was very weird. And then, so all this time, in part because we had the cats growing up and everything like that, I had actually in high school volunteered for San Francisco SPCA as a high schooler, which I would recommend to any high schooler. It was an awesome way for me to hang out with cats during the summer and also crank out my summer reading.
Because you were hanging out with cats.
Yeah, I was hanging out with cats, and they would sit on my lap, and I would get through my summer reading. It was awesome. Which was also very funny, I thought, because come senior year of high school, I actually won the service award, which I was like, oh, I'm really glad that I got the service award, but I was kind of like, all I was doing was sitting with cats.
Wasn't that a lesson that when your job should always be that fun?
Exactly. Then I went to UC Davis, and I had grand visions of me. I've always been a little bit of a nerdy child, so I always really liked history of medicine kind of thing. So I actually went into UC Davis as a classics major, and I thought classics would be the way to go in terms of my history of medicine desires. My winter quarter of freshman year, I realized in one of my history of medicine classes that there was an alternative major named Science and Technology Studies that didn't require me to take Latin, so I dropped out of Latin, the one thing I've ever dropped out of. And then I got my major in Science and Technology Studies. I was able to double major, so I did evolutionary anthropology. So I studied monkeys. But all along this path, sophomore year of college, I got an internship at the National Library of Medicine.
So were you thinking you were going to do vet work?
No, never. So I was volunteering while doing my undergrad. You were just like,
hey, I like animals?
Yep. So I volunteered for the Yola County SPCA, which was a very small foster-based organization. And I really liked doing that. I was hanging out with dogs all the time, all that kind of stuff. But I still just kind of envisioned myself, I'm going to do this academia. I'm going to become, professor or whatever the heck I want.
Part of this is interesting to me because I feel like you made choices that never would have occurred to me to I think we're both interested in animals and we both get into the nerdy science of it. Yeah. But I think I just always felt like, I'm not good at science. That's not like something I'm good at. And so I can't be a vet. Yeah. And I don't know what other options
for me it was a different position.
But I also didn't I literally don't think I knew that there were people out there researching animals and that you could
Oh, you mean my monkey research?
Well, you also have a master's in researching dogs, but I don't think that I thought that was like a job option.
Yeah. So it's cool that you did. Yeah, and I had, going to UC Davis, as Annie had mentioned, it's a very prominent vet school. So there was actually an undergraduate major in animal science. But at this point in time, I knew I liked animals, but I still had this whole dream of, doing whatever with history of medicine, because at that point I knew I didn't want to be a vet. But
is that why you went to UC Davis then? I mean, as opposed to any other school? Was it because it had a program like that?
No.
It was just convenient?
Yeah. I got in other schools, and UC Davis gave me the best financial aid package. So yeah, there was no reason for me, at the end of the day, initially, was for me to go to Davis for animals. It wasn't, this wasn't a plan. So I was still volunteering and did animal stuff on the side. I had all these roommates that did animal science stuff, which was cool. But I didn't, it wasn't, I had no point in my mind that I was going to transfer or anything like that. In part because a lot of the animal science stuff, because I had roommates that were, Davis, being a vet school, also has a very large agriculture program. So it was like, we're going to go to the, UC Davis run slaughterhouse and like all that kind of stuff because it was a very ag-driven school.
Right. I think it's easy to forget this, but up until very recently, if you were a vet, you were working with farm animals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're working with horses, farm animals. Now, there's still vets where that's the only thing they do is treat cows.
One of my old roommates, she got her PhD studying canine genetics, but she just announced the other day that she is officially going to study equine. So that is going to be her forte. Actually, both of my roommates that were animal science majors, neither of them are doing companion animal science, which is interesting. Yeah. So that was kind of how I viewed animal science at UC Davis. I was like, I don't really, I don't, want to go to a slaughterhouse to study classes or whatever. So I ended up in D.C. for a summer. I was working at the National Library of Medicine. I was studying really, really old books, which was very cool. But I actually had this grand epiphany. My brother came to visit, and I'm telling him my future goals. I'm going, I'm going to live in this house, and I'm going to have acreage. I'm going to have all the horsies and piggies and and animals and all this kind of stuff. And my brother just, like, not meaning to say anything, was just like, how are you going to do this when you have a PhD? And I was like, oh, crap. Yeah, because I'm actually going to have to work. I'm not going to be able to just play with animals all the time, because that was ultimately kind of, what my grand thought was. So, kind of had a panic attack in the middle of D.C.
Wait, why can't those two dreams be coexistent again?
Well, like, for me, it was like, I really envisioned myself as, like, just permanently in that position of, like, animals all around me, right? But then I was like, oh, my whole plan in that sense was like, oh, I'm going to be an academic or professor. And, that is can be a rigorous job. So at that point, I was like, oh, it was just kind of a realization, because...
Like, I want to hang out with animals rather than studying them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that was another thing that I also saw from, like, my friends that were animal science majors was more of a kind of analytical approach. And, both of us like science and all that kind of stuff, but it was almost like the animal becoming subject of kind of just, like, more of a robotic analytical side of things, of just, like, animal as subject as opposed to animal as being, and kind of researching the similarities and that kind of thing. So I had a little breakdown in the middle of D.C., called my mom. I was walking to the Trader Joe's in Georgetown. I'm crying on the phone in the middle of middle of D.C., and I'm saying, I don't want to do this. I don't want to get my PhD.
You're like, I don't want to go to fancy school. I
know,
just want
exactly.
to hang out with the puppies and the ponies.
Exactly.
And the piggies.
My mom did ask me. She said, "Are you going to drop out?" And then I was like, "No, I'm not going to drop out." But
this was when you were an undergrad.
Yeah.
Oh.
And my mom just, "Are you dropping out?" And I said, "No, I'm not going to drop out." So I ended up reconfiguring my life a little bit. I emailed the rescue organization that I was working with at the time, and I said, hey, does anyone need any employment? And conveniently, they were looking for a volunteer coordinator. So that started the next 5 years into graduation and post-graduation of me living in Davis, and I worked for an animal rescue organization. Like I said, very small, not many employees. I kind of did different things. Title was volunteer coordinator and outreach, but like I said, I did lots of different things. And as I was kind of, fleshing things out, I realized I still liked the scientific kind of behavior thing. I read, I always would read books about, animal behavior and kind of that psychological aspect of it, humans and dogs, and that I started getting more interested in behavior. So I did an apprenticeship with a trainer back in California in Davis. Really liked it. Nancy Oplanoff with Thinking Dogs. We did a puppy class. We did a basics, manners class. She does like a canine college. So they do like schools field trips down in downtown Davis, and they go like,
so great.
Hang out, and like
so cool.
Parents go and get like a drink with their dog, not watching, so they can go in and the dog gets independence and mat work and all that kind of stuff. So she's done some of that.
And then you ended up moving to New York.
Yes. So came to New York, got my got the program at Animal or Hunter College, and
Anamarie has a master's in animal behavior and conservation
yes.
from Hunter, which has a great program.
Yep. And started off because I thought I still wanted to do shelter stuff. I worked for a couple months, nearly a year, at the animal care centers of New York City, and then I said, "Oh shoot, my master's degree is really great, and it's going to be really great." But if you look at kind of dog training opportunities, a lot of it they ask for some level of certification, and this is one thing that we've discussed on our blogs and written about and everything like that. But certification in the dog training world is a very hazy thing. But there's some standardized organizations. One is the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers. One is Care and Prior Academy, which Annie went through. So I was like, oh, okay. So you need to get apprenticeship hours to get a certification, which is a nice thing to have, I guess, also in lieu of a master's degree. So then I reached out to School for Dogs. And here we are 3 years later. Those memories of when it was just, Annie and Kate and me and just the one-room studio on 2nd Street. And we're huge.
I think you were our second employee.
Yeah.
And that was 3 years ago. And tell us, what have you been doing in the last 3 years?
What have I been doing in the last 3 years? Well, and it's been a range of things. Early 2015 was when Annie and I were first getting our feet wet with the day training program, or the day school program.
Yeah, day training. We started that. We started that right around when you started, I guess.
Yeah, it was
right?
like October. Yeah, so we did, at that point, God, it was only like 1 day a week. It was like 1 day a week day school, which now is 5 days a week with 2 afternoon sessions. It's gotten crazy. Day school did we know?
Yeah, day school for the uninitiated is our drop-off program now that we do. It's
half day.
It's a half day. We do morning and afternoon sessions, and there's usually 4 dogs and a minimum of 2 trainers. Mm-hmm. And if we have apprentices, sometimes it's even like almost one-on-one. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah. We have fun with them. They're our buddies for those hours.
Yes. So did day school.
Sure, right.
And then,
which you still do sometimes.
I still do sometimes. And then once I had gotten kind of more of my feet, quote unquote, wet in terms of shadowing, which we still institute now for our apprenticeship program, I started taking on clients. So I had taken some that had branched off from Annie and Kate, then started getting my own clients. So for the last 3 years, it's been a mix of day school. It's been a mix of private clients, which is, seeing them one-on-one and working with just puppies, working with leash reactivity, working with all kinds of fun things in the grand big world of New York City.
And teaching classes.
Puppy K and prep and all that kind of good stuff.
And but here's a question that I bet nobody's ever asked you before.
We'll see.
When did you first learn about classical conditioning?
Okay, so when I first learned about, everyone knows about Pavlov from school, elementary school.
Well, also everybody knows about classical conditioning, they just don't.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
most people don't know what it's called.
I think for most people.
But a lot of people don't know about Pavlov and don't learn about Pavlov in school. So tell us about
Well, then I guess I got a good education. So Pavlov.
Your Catholic schoolgirl days.
My Catholic schoolgirl days. So Pavlov was
Russian,
and
he was studying gastrointestinal systems.
Yes,
in
dogs, and he
early
had
1900s.
And he was studying the gastrointestinal system and was trying to get them to. He was measuring their salivation, right? Mm-hmm. And he would get them to salivate with what we now define as an unconditioned stimulus, which was meat. I feel like that's a very pop culture reference too.
Yeah, but do you remember learning that in school? I don't. I mean, I guess I did.
Yeah.
You did. You remember a class where they taught you this?
Not a specific class, but yeah. I mean, in psych.
Well, I don't know. Not all schools have psych.
A psych section.
I don't think I learned about what classical conditioning was in school. But to finish talking about Pavlov, so Pavlov,
anyway,
he actually, I believe. I mean, I wasn't there.
I wasn't there.
But I believe it started out as a nuisance where he was entering the room to start these experiments, but the dogs were salivating before they got the food.
Yeah, probably.
And he was like, "Wait, actually, I think there's something happening here." So he just started doing different things, like having someone else enter the room with a white lab coat to see if white lab coat would become a conditioned stimulus. And but we're getting ahead of ourselves because we haven't even defined what a conditioned stimulus is.
Exactly.
And dog training has all of these terms like this, which are not purely dog training terms. They relate to the science of behavior that I feel like when you explain it, it's so obvious, but they sound off-putting and fancy.
Yes.
So Pavlovian conditioning basically is called Pavlovian conditioning because Pavlov realized that whatever preceded giving these dogs their food would eventually take on the meaning basically of the food. And that hearing in the case of Pavlov, I think it was actually a buzzer, bell, whatever is presented prior to giving the food will eventually create the same reaction as the food itself. And that became known as Pavlovian conditioning. And
there's been lots of pop culture references as of late. The one I think of is the Office reference where Jim keeps on turning on, or he keeps shutting off his computer or turning it on, and then as soon as so you hear the Microsoft noise, and then he'll offer Dwight across the way from him a mint.
Oh, damn, that was another file. Gonna have to reboot again. Hey, Dwight, do you want an Altoid? In school, we learned about this scientist who trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell by feeding them whenever a bell rang. So for the past couple weeks, I've been conducting a similar experiment. Dwight, want an Altoid? Okay.
My mouth tastes so bad all of a sudden.
So you sometimes, if you keep your eye out, sometimes you'll see it in kind of like television and stuff because people think it's a kind of funny association.
If you keep your eye out, though, you'll see it in every part of your life.
Yeah,
I mean, yes, you'll see references to Pavlovian conditioning. But what's funny to me is sometimes when people are watching dog training happening, they'll say, "Oh, it's so Pavlovian," but really, I want to be like, "Yeah, but so is like." Everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like anything that we're not born knowing about that we associate a meaning with eventually because of paired repetitions is something that has been classically conditioned, Pavlovian conditioned. So what's an example of an unconditioned?
An unconditioned stimulus is something that already kind of has it just has a reinforcing factor to it
that you didn't need to be born.
You didn't need to be, you kind of think of like natural things. So like, like quote unquote instinctual, like food, and you think, something that is inherently pleasurable, that didn't require any,
learning,
additional learning on top of that, obviously.
Food, sex.
Right. And it doesn't necessarily have to necessarily be a positive. So touching your hand to a hot stove, I would consider that an unconditioned stimulus because the immediate effect of the heat.
It's more like the flame, wouldn't
true.
it? Yeah. The flame, that's the unconditioned stimulus. Where we have an inherent fear of something like fire.
Yep.
Or, a baby doesn't have to be taught to go to a nipple. They're not conditioned to know what a nipple is.
Yes.
But dogs and humans and all of us are conditioned to know what lots of things are based on the associations we make with those things.
Yeah, I think a funny example I like to give is these are common things that I do that happen every single night, and like my husband and I joke about it now. Common things for my dogs are the one embarrassing, the one embarrassing conditioned response that my dogs had elicited is when I used to work from home for the rescue that I worked with back in California. I used to wear pajamas all the time, and as soon as I started putting on actual clothes, my dogs had the response that, "Oh my God, Mom's going outside." And they'd get really, really excited, which was somewhat embarrassing. But kind of on my day-to-day life now, my husband and I will watch TV at night. And the dogs are kind of relaxing and calm and everything like that. And as soon as the television goes off and you hear the television noise, bida-boop, they bolt because they're like, "Oh my God, it's like we're going to dinner or, it's going to bed. We're having our quote unquote second dinner," because one of my dogs has issues, but whatever. And we're doing a second dinner and they immediately run to the food bowls and they just stand there. And Kenny and I will be like, "No, we just shut off the television because we don't want to watch it anymore." And then the dogs just get really amped up and really upset because they're like, "No, we heard the buzzer, even though we haven't done anything."
When they hear that, they run to their food bowls?
Exactly.
Well, that would be an easy thing to teach as an added cue.
Yep, exactly.
Add a cue to, which, so if you wanted to teach your dog run to your food bowl, you would say, run to your food bowl, and then turn off your TV.
Yep. And then inherently they're self-rewarded.
And then eventually, run to your food bowl will become the conditioned stimulus.
Exactly.
Which is really just what language is. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, it's so interesting when I think about learning languages in that way. You know?
Yeah, and that's
how all you're doing is teaching your dog a language by saying, like, that thing that you're doing now, we used to call it boop, but now we're going to call it run to your food bowl.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I tell clients when I'm saying, like, don't start labeling, like, don't start giving a cue to something if your dog doesn't know it. I like to define it as, like, we're just, like, labeling it for the dog. Like, you've already done this in an existence. My hand signal up or me standing here has already been, your response to sit. And now we're just going to label this whole sequence of behavior of you sitting with this random arbitrary word.
Right.
Because they don't really know what it means.
Like, if I was trying to teach you how to say, go to the bathroom in French, I could say, Anamarie, go to the bathroom in French over and over and over. But if you don't know what that means, I mean, eventually you might go to the bathroom and then I could, like, throw a party. But it's like, it's more efficient
if I was already going to the bathroom and then you to label it.
Right.
Oh, that's what it is.
And otherwise, what I've really trained is, like, I've trained in frustration with you, and the eventual going to the bathroom is just part of, like, a larger thing that has now been paired with, like, me saying going to the bathroom a million times. And who wants to tell anyone to go to the bathroom a million times? It's funny. Speaking of going to the bathroom, everything's funny related to going to the bathroom.
Exactly.
For Amos, when I rinse my mouth out with mouthwash, he like perks up. He's like, okay, we must be going out.
Yeah. Well, and my dad toothbrushing too, like toothbrushing at night. That's like another, that they immediately like run to the back door.
Or my dad used to say that our dog had a concept of money because every time he would rip a check out of the checkbook, she would run to the door because it meant that they were going to the bank, and he would bring her to the bank. So, classical conditioning is one of my favorite topics of all time. One, which doesn't relate to dog training, is that it's all of advertising, basically. Yeah. And it relates very much to how we relate to each other and the way that we present ourselves and choices that we make. So I think all of that's fascinating. But the other thing is that if you can focus on classical conditioning in dog training before you start focusing on operant conditioning, which is the other kind of learning that we're dealing with dogs, I think in most cases, if an owner, whether it has a dog who is just starting out training or is a puppy or a dog who has issues, if all they think about is the classical conditioning, almost always you're setting up your dog for success, and you're also keeping bad things from happening as far as fear goes, because I think most of the time the behaviors we don't like in dogs stem from fear.
Said the monkey to the chimp.
I personally, as we were discussing ourselves being classical conditioned, after years of doing skateboard reactivity work, I have such a natural, almost classical conditioned response, and I feel like a lot of people...
It is classically conditioned.
In terms of when I hear skateboard, I don't even have to be working a dog, and my immediate response is to go find it, which is one of the behaviors that will teach dogs in order to, move their head away and go hunting for food.
We have a lot of dogs who are so scared of skateboards that just there doesn't even have to be a person on a skateboard. Just the very sight of a skateboard is scary.
One of my foster dogs back in California, we literally put a skateboard out, and we didn't expect there to be response, and he literally peed on the floor. We were in the house. Yeah, he was just scared by the sight of it.
Mm-hmm. And then there, or I was gonna say we should talk about Rudy.
Oh, really?
But a lot of dogs.
Rudy's the king of classical conditioned fears.
Many dogs have fear of skateboards, and like you're saying, there are I've met owners, and I've felt it myself, actually, at times, like you're saying you felt it, that... You explain.
So, like, you're so in tune. Like, when I'm working with a skateboard reactive, I just saw a client the other day that was skateboard reactive, and they were like, okay, my dog's heightenedly aware when we go outside, and now I'm heightenedly aware. And so there's all this just, like, even though essentially you're working off your dog's fear, and it becomes this own, like, intense classically conditioned response where you're just like, oh my god, I'm on the look all the time, I need to, where's the skateboard, oh my god, there's a skateboard, oh my god, and then you almost become the same response as your dog does, just in the anticipation of it, even though you don't have an association of it. Your initial association of a skateboard was, oh, it's a person skateboarding, but now that you're stemming off your dog's fear, everyone now has this conditioned response to a skateboard.
And these kinds of fears, that jumping that happens like that can happen from one part of the thing to the other. In the same way, it can go from, the sound of the skateboard to the sight of the skateboard. Yep. It can then be like the kid who's on the skateboard that's causing fear. Mm-hmm. Like Rudy.
Yep. So generalization.
Right. So we have this one dog, Rudy, that both Anamarie and I have worked with.
Rudy. Shout out to Rudy. Rudy, he is a very interesting personality. Rudy has a lot of fears. And I think this is one thing that's important to discuss in terms of conditioning and fear responses, is that it doesn't necessarily, a lot of people think, and that's one thing that we always deal with my background in the shelter world, is, people are very in tune of wanting to get a puppy from the get-go in terms of, oh, I'm going to prevent X, Y, and Z behaviors. But one thing that's important to think about with classical conditioning is that you can't always anticipate what the response is going to be and what that fear might lead. So with Rudy, he was actually adopted as a puppy. And they did all the right things, right?
He has the best owners.
And he has the best owners.
I would like to be adopted by them.
Yes, exactly. And Rudy was actually adopted as a puppy. And in, kind of my background of experience, they did all the right things that you would say on paper, right? They took the training classes. They did all of that. But for one thing that is aware to think about is Rudy probably just genetically, which is sometimes you can't overcome genetics. Rudy genetically is probably just more of a fear responsive dog. He just has a more heightened fear response. So despite doing classical conditioning as probably recommended in his puppy kindergarten, he just tends to be a little bit more reactive.
Or not.
We can go back to that. He can maybe be a little bit more reactive than another dog that could have been the same age and adopted at the same time.
Right, I think that's very true. People make the false generalization that if a dog has problems, it's because something happened to the dog, or if the dog has problems, it's because they're reflecting the human's problems, and those are both such fallacies. Because... I mean, I think it's possible for it to go in the other direction. I think it's possible that if you are a person and you have serious problems, your dog might
for sure
have serious problems. But I think it would be false to say that that's always the case, because we have owners who have done everything right, sometimes since the dog was literally born. Yep. And the dog has issues, and I mean, is it possible that it was caused by something that, was something that happened that none of us can perceive, and that's the
exactly.
reason? Yes, that's possible, but it's also possible the dog was just born with, like...
higher levels of anxiety.
Yeah, higher levels of anxiety.
We all agree.
which is part of, fear evolutionarily has a lot of benefits. Yep. Talking about fear. So Rudy, though... Yes. Rudy, I call him the Woody Allen of dogs, because he's just, like... The extra neurotic. Yes. Although, but it also, we should say, it can be epigenetics, right? Yep. Like, it's not just, everything's been fine for every generation, and then this one dog pops out with issues. Like, stress in the mother, or
which would be for him very, very likely, considering that he was a shelter, as a puppy. To list some of the things that Rudy is afraid of, one is children. Now, having had Rudy since he was 4 months old, his owners know fairly well that there was no reason for Rudy to not like children. It's not like he was exposed. He didn't have children growing up, anything like that. There weren't kids that were in the house that were potentially, messing with him or anything. But for some reason, kids just tend to elicit a very strong fear response in them. He'll bark, he'll lunge, anything like that. Now, that all this being said, Rudy has gotten far, far better. With the help of our training. I don't want to say that. I don't want to act that, we've been working for all this time. But one thing to be aware of is one thing, and we can get a little bit more into it, one thing that we do utilize with classical conditioning is what we call this idea of counter conditioning.
But what I think is funny about Rudy with the generalization is Rudy went from, not funny, I mean, it's just unfortunate, but it's a good example, is Rudy went from being scared of, I think something having to do with movement. I mean, I think the children thing has to do with children running around.
Yep.
And that has now extended to any child. But,
standing.
But also, skateboards and where he used to live in the East Village was right near a school, and there'd be like lots of kids on scooters.
Yep.
And so it seems like it also had to do with anything having to do with wheels.
Essentially, the main goal is that we change the association that has already been classically conditioned. So, you counter classical condition something. And a lot of times we utilize food. But one thing that is also important is that, especially for something that is fear-based, sometimes it can be movement away from the object. So rather than requiring the dog to just stand there and then continue to get fed food, which might be too stressful, you can also reward by moving away or giving an alternate behavior.
You're pairing the formerly scary thing with something good.
Yep.
Which could be distance, or it could be food, or it could be a scratch on the head.
Yes.
But usually we use the bigger guns, like
Turkey.
the bacon, the turkey.
Yep. Because it tends to be a little bit more high value and a little bit more salient to the dog than something like kibble or just movement. So, in a positive note of Rudy, the mister of all problems, we love him very much. I've actually gotten to the point with him, because with skateboards, one of the bane of our existence with training is that a lot of it is the unpredictable, which is really hard when dogs like to have consistency in their lives, and then when you just kind of throw skateboards at them every which way, it's scary. So what I've actually been able to do is we go to the McCarran Dog Park in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, and we'll just kind of stand outside the park, and every time he looks, and he gets a treat. Rudy has also played the game so much that now he just does a quick look, so I've had to build in duration for him. But we've gotten to a point where he actually is now refusing to leave the skate park because he knows it equals turkey. So I would say that's a good sign of his conditioning. Now, that doesn't mean in that context, in that skate park where it's a little bit more controlled and managed, and he's working with me and he knows there's all that kind of stuff, he doesn't have that same, it doesn't elicit that same fear response. But, I do check in with his parents, and, sometimes, 10 o'clock evening walks when a random skateboard comes out from around the corner, he still will resort back to that, more conditioned classical response where it's more that fear-based
because
thing.
It's hard to practice those moments, but by doing the work you're doing, you would think you're lessening it to some extent. Now, here's the surprise answer that I think you're going to give to my question, or surprise to perhaps to our listeners.
Okay.
Rudy goes crazy. Let's say it's 10 p.m. They're walking him, and the guy, the food delivery guy, goes by. What do you tell them? And he goes nuts. Mm-hmm. What do you tell them to do?
I would tell them to move away, increase distance, right? Because at that point, that's going to be more rewarding. Or you could give them something like a find it or treats at the ground, right? Because you're still wanting to change that association. Even if he is reacting, it's just kind of the experience.
And by reacting, we mean barking. The reason I think this is surprising is because I know when I first started to understand this in dog training, I was like, what? Science must be wrong.
You're rewarding the barking.
You're rewarding the barking. And this is like the special thing about classical conditioning that's so important to remember is behavior doesn't matter.
Yep.
it's not about what they're doing.
Purely experiential.
It's about what they're feeling. It's not right. It's about their experience of the world, and what they're doing has absolutely no play. Right? It's do you explain it to people that way?
Yeah, I say, like, I remind people that it's just kind of, the behavior doesn't factor into anything. It's literally just, I want you to experience this moment, and this moment is a scary thing now equals
something good.
Treats get shoved in my face.
Right.
Because I think a lot of times a lot of people are very set on, especially when they're in the midst of, like, having a puppy and they're doing all these great things, like practicing sits and downs and all that kind of stuff. It's our default to be like, oh, my dog has to earn the treat. And it's our default to be like, oh my God, well, there's a skateboard that came by. I have to ask my dog to sit, and then they get a treat, and then everything will be fine. Because now my dog will learn to sit when the thing comes by, and then they get a treat, and blah, blah, blah. And it's really just, like, muddying the water.
It's overthinking it.
So a lot of times I just
poor language teaching, really.
Because that's not how it would work. I don't think we would learn that way either.
It might, and I think that's what the reason training like that persists is, like, it might work, but your definition of work might not be so spot on. Yep. So Rudy's fears have escalated to the point where he is. Or was, I don't know. I haven't seen him for a while.
He's been really, really good.
But when I was working with him, I watched. It was like switching seats in the Titanic. Actually, people would be like, "Oh, we solved this problem. Oh, no!" It became like a whack-a-mole situation because we deal with one fear and another would pop up. But invariably, the fear that would pop up would be somehow related. So it seemed as if, and also, dogs are making associations all the time, every day, like every moment of every day. So a lot of the times we're not even tuned into the associations we're making. We can just make guesses. But for him, I watched it go from like anything with wheels, bikes, to delivery men on the bikes, to anyone wearing like a bike-like vest, so even if they weren't on a bike, to basically anyone carrying shopping bags, and anyone who was like Hispanic. Because people joke that their dogs are racist. Like, dogs can seriously be racist, and I think he made the connection that there were a lot of, well, maybe Asian too, but like sort of smaller, like darker skinned men.
Those tend to be the populations in New York City that deliver food.
Yes.
And if it happened to be, blonde haired and blue eyed people, it would have been the same thing.
Well, Rudy's a great example as far as clients go, I think, of people who want to do dog training with their dog, and not because it's going to solve all of their dog's problems, but because they realize their dog has a propensity to develop problems because they're very sensitive, and and they're having these dogs live in what might not be the absolute ideal environment. But they've chosen to put him in this life, and he's doing great, but they're also not. They're using training as a way to enrich his life and to ensure against problems. And I think a lot of the stuff that we do with him is stuff that his owners could do with him. It's if you can bring in a professional to do that and for you.
I've been described, my last Christmas letter from them was described as the auntie/therapist. The beloved auntie/therapist for Rudy.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I know it's not something everyone can afford.
Yep.
But I think it's really great that like they've made this a priority in their
and one
life.
thing that is important to think about with
think about the money people spend on cars and other ridiculous hobbies. Like Rudy is like the most unridiculous hobby. He is like
he's the best.
He's the best.
But one thing that is good to think about in terms of us discussing all of this is, yes, we do this in our like day-to-day life. Yes, I do an hour per week with Rudy. But it's funny, the last couple weeks that I've done it, like, it's pretty common that Rudy will just come in and then, like, flat out, like, pass out on the ground. And in my view, I've, like, been teasing him. I'm like, Rudy, we literally did nothing today. We literally, like, walked down to the park, I fed you some cheese, like...
He was like, that was so much work.
And he's, like, exhausted after it. And, like, his dad is, like... he's always so tired after training. So that's an important thing to think about, too, in terms
like
of...
even just a little bit of
and
training.
enrichment and doing this kind of like classical conditioning is, classical conditioning requires a lot in terms of consistency. Like, every time a skateboard comes by,
when you're using it in training. Yeah.
When you're using it in training. But that doesn't necessarily, classical conditioning, as Annie would agree, is happening all the time. So it doesn't have to be anything beyond your normal scope of your scheduled day. You don't have to be like, oh my God, I didn't do my 3-hour session of classical conditioning today with a skateboard. Just making sure that every time you're going on a walk, you're having cheese out, and
but also
you're preparing for that.
you become the conditioned reinforcer too, and just the fact that you are feeding, I think the fact that you are feeding your dog at any point, even if it's in your kitchen, is helping build a good association with you.
And I think that's one reason why I think a lot of our clients always say, like, oh my God, my dog loves you so much, or focuses on you. It's like we've just become giant conditioned reinforcers for feeding treats.
Well, and
the fun and excitement and all that kind of stuff, and the kisses.
And I think it's also why they enjoy coming to school.
Yep.
I mean, I think most schools would do a lot better with kids if they made the food a lot better.
Yeah. And I think that is
and
actually...
if they made them more enjoyable places to be.
Ultimately, that is the hugest... that's the hugest... the hugest compliment that we can get is that the school itself becomes this giant conditioned reinforcer for our clients, to the point where clients get upset that they have to walk down 2nd Street and not go to school, where the dogs just associate this random... It's a random storefront in the East Village, but it has so much meaning and conditioned response to them that they will plant themselves outside of school.
Which is so not how I felt about school.
Which none of us felt about school.
But it's a difference between, training with positive reinforcement and conditioning, classical conditioning, rather than coercion. And having to be somewhere because you feel like you have to be there.
It's a legal requirement.
Yeah, because it's a legal requirement to be in school.
It's a legal requirement.
Well, yeah, I think I also think that if the dog likes going there, the person is also being classical conditioned to like going there, because the dog, people...
They see their dog light up.
And they're making an association, this place makes my dog happy. Anamarie is leaving us.
I know.
She's moving to California. She is going to be doing shelter work there. I say she's leaving us, but she's only leaving us physically. digitally
and emotionally. Stay tuned.
Yes. But thank you, Anamarie, for all you've done for School for the Dogs, for our clients, for me, and I love you, and thank you for being on this podcast.
No problem.
In honor of Anamarie, our fun dog fact of the day is about California. Did you know that the California state dog is actually the shelter dog? They chose the shelter dog to represent the state in order to draw attention to the need to find homes for shelter pets. Isn't that cool? Special thanks to Ellie Lonan for letting me use her ukulele cover of the wonderful song Abba Dabba Honeymoon. And our woof shout-out of the day goes actually to a human this week, specifically to the human who was one half of the team that created Anamarie, her mother, Ann Urrutia of Daly City, California. I know earlier in the episode I criticized her jingle writing talents, but upon consideration, I think she might have a future in jingle writing. That is, if she wants to pair up with me and my husband Jason. Here is our reimagining of her jingle.
Some people, they have dogs. Some people, they have cats, but we have flies. They fit better into our lives.
Now for something completely different.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another show. If you liked this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate, and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. And of course, tell your friends. If you have suggestions for future topics or questions about training, please make sure to join our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/school for the dogs. See you next week.